Niha, Anya, hello, I am the Dark Fae and welcome back to The Right Way. So last time we talked about kind of storyboarding and some kind of tips and methods on how to kind of get out of writer's block and to kind of help with keeping your storyline cohesive. And today we're going to dive into one of those points and talk about the exposition. So the exposition is arguably like the most important part of your story, since that's kind of what the readers are first introduced to, and that's kind of what will draw them in to keep reading. The exposition is kind of to set up your world, set up your character, set up your location. It's a lot of information to throw at the reader all at once, and so there are a couple different things that you want to avoid, such as just kind of listing out facts kind of rapid fire. So one of like the key points of writing or storytelling or world building is to show, don't tell. We probably hear that a lot in like high school English or English classes, writing classes. But that is really important. You don't really want to just use a lot of words and a lot of bullet points kind of, and just a lot of like lists of kind of like what happened, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, because that doesn't really show them what's going on in your story currently, or going on with your character, going on in the world. There is kind of a balance. Sometimes you do kind of end up giving a little bit of history, and that will kind of end up being sort of a more of a narration type of information giving. But I found that works best when you kind of tie it into something that's going on in your story, and that's something that's happening to your character. So say your character meets someone and is talking, or they're going on in their everyday lives, or something spectacular happens, and then using that, you can kind of lead that into like why it's happening, or what happened before, or what that could allude to, whether in the past or the future, etc. So it takes some time to kind of practice it, but if you go off of kind of your storyboard points and you think of those as kind of like the narrator of the scene, try to take those pieces and then like write out an ongoing scene or some kind of scenario to fit them, if that makes sense. Let me see if I can give you an example. I think one of like the things that I used for introducing a little bit of the history was I had my main character. She was going through the castle to meet the king, and the king has a series of portraits that kind of outline the history of his conquest. And so I kind of used that, her going to meet the king, to kind of explain what had happened in the past and like how he got there to be king, and kind of how that affected the state of the world now. So it's kind of something like that, where something is happening to your character, and that something is significant or alludes to the rest, like alludes to the tone or the history of your world. I think that really helps to kind of keep things engaging, and it doesn't feel like a slog of just history or just a big kind of block of words that readers have to go through and really, really dissect, especially in the beginning of the story where it's easy for people to drop off. And so in your exposition, you really do want to find a way to introduce all of this information to your readers. It doesn't have to be all at once. Preferably it's not all at once. I would say try to maybe focus on maybe one or two parts at a time. Maybe like one significant area and then some other throw in some small pieces in there. So for example, you could start off by introducing your character and kind of what they're about, and their motivations and like their family situation or their educational situation or magic power situation or something to kind of establish a baseline of who they are. And then that can kind of lead into you introducing where they are, their location, or their hometown, for example, where they come from. And then that hometown kind of can start to branch out, and you can start to reveal more information about what that city is like and how it ties into the rest of the world, the other cities. Maybe this is a small town compared to like the capital, which is much grander, or maybe this is the kingdom where everything is kind of crazy but strict. And so it's kind of, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in that order. You can kind of start in any kind of way that you want. It really depends on kind of what you want to open up with. So to keep readers engaged, for me personally, I try to kind of start off with something something a little bit more exciting. I don't necessarily like to start with something just very like simple and kind of like a baseline, but that can be a good way to do things as well. But since I tend to write more on like the fantastical or the horror side, I find that to really introduce what my world is like, it's a better technique to kind of just like throw my readers into it. But there are definitely times when you want to kind of build up gradually and kind of like establish this is my character or location or whatever, and then all of a sudden it starts to build and like something unique happens and then it kind of progresses. But yeah, I like to start off with something a little bit more immersive, I guess. For example, I have a story about an exorcist who basically has to deal with the guilt of like an accidental murder. So right off the bat, the scene I start off with is of her finding a ghost to perform an exorcism on. Or I have a story where it's like a divided kingdom and there are executions kind of for entertainment, kind of gladiatorial-esque. And so I start off that story with, actually it's been a long time since I think I started off that story almost like right at the executions or where they're getting ready for the execution. So that's kind of more of a baseline and then kind of like building up to what it is unique about the world, versus the Exorcist story jumping right into what is unique or crazy or special. So yeah, and those are kind of a couple ways that I get started. It can be difficult to kind of look at a blank page and think, oh, where do I start? If you are really stuck, I would say just start with the narration portion of it. Just like list what happens, kind of like how you did in your storyboard, and then see if you can find the kind of a natural flow from there. I find like starting off with a quote, like somebody talking, two people having a conversation is an easy way to get started. Or if something spectacular is happening, just start with just throwing your readers into the middle of something spectacular. Like boom, an explosion happens in the middle of the town square, or a monster appears in the street or something like that, So and don't be afraid to like change your beginning as well. It doesn't necessarily have to start where you've started. If you think of something better or think of a more appropriate place for your story to start, definitely by all means go there instead. And if you ever do feel like your world has changed from the way you introduced it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean you have to go back and rewrite all of your exposition to fit how your world is now. It just kind of means that maybe that was how your character saw it or how the audience saw it the world at first, but now that has evolved with your character. So that can be a really cool thing too, and something that your readers can relate to as well. So I just wanted to kind of give my thoughts on how to go about making your exposition interesting and immersive for your reader, and kind of ways to avoid that like pitfall of just kind of being too wordy and just writing great big old paragraphs of text to just like tell people what your world is about. Because I know it's exciting, you're excited about what you're making and you want to share as much as possible, but showing some restraint and kind of letting the aspects of the world kind of like leak out in natural and like interesting ways will be better for the story's flow, as well as to like maintain your reader's attention. So I think that's about all I have. So the writing exercise for today is to write the first scene of your novel. There's no page limit. It can be a couple paragraphs. It can be a couple pages. It could be maybe not a couple chapters. That might be a bit much. But yeah, go ahead and like brainstorm some first scenes. Write them out. See which one feels right and which one feels like they can best introduce your story and your world. I'll comment down below on any like blockers or any like questions that might come up while writing it. So thanks so much for watching. Next time I might get into a bit more of like a less writing specific, probably maybe like the main antagonist, because that's also a very important part. So thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye!